Have you ever known someone who is just completely reasonable and smart and intelligent and capable of kind of seeing through all the BS? And then when they start going into the political arena, whichever side they're on, Democrat or Republican, doesn't really matter, they get to a point where, and it doesn't take too long, they just become stupid. And they don't just become stupid about political issues. They become stupid about other stuff too. And they just get to the point where they're just blindly accepting whatever they're being spoon-fed. And then all their training and critical thinking and everything else they know just goes out the window. Well, there's science to back that up. And this story I'm looking at here, The Partisan Brain, references several of them that you can see. I don't think the links are going to be that obvious. That might be because of this extension I'm using to get the dark background that y'all seem to like so much. But I know I like it. But the links are there. And if you mouse over those links, you can actually see the link. I don't know. Is my mouse on? You probably... They're there, trust me. Yeah, links to all of these. And they're not like, some wonky libertarian think tank or anything. This article is from a wonky libertarian think tank, the Cato Institute, but the links are to peer-reviewed science. So they write, we now have decades of research suggesting, if not proving, the ubiquity of emotion-based motivated reasoning. There's a growing literature on the startling character and extent of political ignorance. And they start with a 2018 study of why and how partisanship impairs the brain's ability to process information objectively. And that's according to these NYU researchers. Partisanship can alter memory, implicit evaluation, and even perceptual judgments. And one recent study published last fall set out to better understand how partisan biases develop in the brain. The researchers had subjects watch a series of videos using fMRI to explore the neural mechanisms that underlie the biased processing of real-world political content. So what's going on? It's not anything that they're deciding to do. It's not, there's just, this is my team, I'm going with it. There's actual changes in the brain that's happening because of this. And they located the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, a region associated with understanding and formulating narratives. The study also found, perhaps unsurprisingly, that to the extent a given participant's brain activity during the videos aligned with that of the average liberal or average conservative, the participant was more likely to take up that group's position. And that goes along with years of research showing that partisans' opinions on social, political, and economic issues are affected by subconscious brain processes of which they're neither aware of nor in control. Loyalty to the team seems to be overriding the higher faculties of the mind. As one of the study's authors says, critically, these differences do not imply that people are hardwired to disagree. Rather, these neural pathways seem to be carved largely by the kinds and sources of the media we consume. From the data yielded by such research, among many other similar studies, a picture begins to emerge of partisanship as a kind of mind poisoning, an infection that leads to serious and, importantly, measurable cognitive impairment. Evidence suggests that, under the influence of partisanship, we can't even understand our own thoughts and opinions. Let me say that again because it's important. Under the influence of partisanship, we can't even understand our own thoughts and opinions. And so if you remember kind of in the heyday of Richard Dawkins and all the other new atheists, they were talking about this stuff with religion and how it does that. But really, it's not about religion per se. It's about the partisanship. And of course, religion has engaged in all of these different partisan tactics. But nowhere to the extent that politics has, and certainly not, as bad as it's gotten today. In another important recent experiment, the researchers set out to gauge people's ability to understand their own choices to see clearly the elements of internal argumentation that led to their choices. Whether subjects would notice mismatches between their intended choice and the outcome they are presented with. Would subjects recognize that something was off? If they failed to notice the manipulation, would they offer justifications for choices they had not even made? The results revealed a conspicuous introspective blindness to the internal processes leading to a moral or political judgment. People didn't seem to understand why they had made the decisions they'd made or had not made, though some exhibited what the researchers call unconscious detection of self-deception. These subjects were unable to detect the manipulations of their answers, but they did register lower confidence in the manipulated choices, which the authors suggest points to the existence of a natural mechanism unconsciously monitoring our own thoughts. And this is, again, the same kind of thing we've seen with religion. Oh, you're not even supposed to have that thought, because even having that thought is sinful. That's what they're trying to bed down. Same thing is happening today. And we see it in spades, especially with the media bias the way it is. If you have anything, not just conservative, but anything that goes against their narrative, those are horrible thoughts that you're not even allowed to have. They're actually even calling it, I forget the term they've come up with it, but basically they consider libertarianism to be a mental disorder. So it's not good. And they say once one has chosen and joined a team, she has very little control over her own thoughts. When they are introduced, new data are distorted, misinterpreted, or discarded based on their consistency with what we may describe as a program running in the background. Partisanship leads the team member into a cognitive position of unconscious self-deception. Few of us, if fully understanding this phenomenon, would choose it for themselves. At least, that's the hope of many who study this area. As the authors observe, reflecting on our beliefs may help to develop free societies. They suggest that if citizens better understood the brain mechanics of the cognitive impairment and self-deception brought on by partisanship, they'd be positioned to make better decisions. Research has shown that reflecting on how we make decisions leads to better decisions. So if you're worried that anything about this might be you, and any of it might be a problem that you're having to deal with and not even know that, understand that just by watching this video and being aware of it and thinking about it, you can actually begin in some small way to counter it. So that's why it's really important that people understand this. And they've also confirmed the presence of the Dunning-Kruger Effect, something we've talked about a lot. But within the context of politics, the effect is exaggerated. So the Dunning-Kruger Effect, that's when you start to learn a little bit about something, you have this really overinflated idea of how much you know. So you don't know anything about economics. You read an article on the minimum wage and how all those conservatives are just so crazy. They think minimum wage destroys jobs when it really creates them and makes things better and more puppies and rainbows and everything else. You get this idea that you know a lot more about economics and the minimum wage than you really do. Well, with a political issue like the minimum wage, that is going to have a much more pronounced effect than it will with anything else. And that's another reason why you see people just digging in their heels when you try and show them the real science, over hundreds of years, of economic thought, all these economic studies that continue to this day. And you try to show them how they're being lied to and manipulated by people who are either doing bogus studies or just outright lying by existing studies and what they say. They just dig in. Low knowledge participants describe themselves as even more knowledgeable than usual once partisanship is made a conspicuous factor. Objective truth, meaning roughly an accurate model of reality, is not important, or at least not anywhere near as important as conformity and indeed submission, which we may associate with social reality. It's important to underline the fact that when we speak of partisanship, we are not speaking of ideology. And this is what the kind of things we get when we criticize someone who's a partisan. They come up, we are just an ideologue. This is your ideology. Well, ideology isn't necessarily a bad thing. And libertarianism isn't really an ideology. It's more of a resistance of ideologies. It tells you that there are a lot of ideologies that aren't worth listening to. But anyway, we're not speaking of ideology. The relationship between partisan identification and political ideology is complicated, the connection between the two not particularly strong. Ideologues tend to think systematically, and the philosophical contents of their beliefs are deeply important to them. What's important to the partisan is not what she believes, but that she aligns her beliefs with those of her team or in-group. Or else, as may be the case, that she is loyal to and supportive of the party group despite any real or perceived ideological non-concurrences. So even if she were able to, take on this hypothetical person and ideology, whenever she hears her team saying something that goes against that ideology, she's not going to let her ideology say that her teams might be wrong. It's going to be the other way. Her team is going to supplant whatever ideology she might have. And they say Americans tend to vastly overestimate the differences in political ideology and policy preferences between Democrats and Republicans. Oh boy, have we covered that for over 10 years on this channel. And just example after example. And they're like, there's all different. You're not that different, people. You're not that different. Get over yourselves. You're not that clever. You're not that unique. You're just a bunch of sheep braying with the rest of your flock. And that's what this science is showing. In fact, most Americans are not at all ideological, can't describe ideologies accurately as their proponents would describe them, and have almost no information on either the history of ideas or the empirical evidence that bears on particular political or policy questions. Indeed, strong partisanship is necessarily an impediment to ideological thinking insofar as ideology is predicated on an integrated and consistent approach to policy questions, as against the blind, team-rooting approach associated in the literature with partisanship. Ideological people, whatever their flaws, hold political actors and government bodies to account. Maybe not all of them, maybe not as much as they should, but that's what your ideology would do. Partisans change positions readily and shamelessly depending on anything from who is living in the White House to the vagaries of party leaders to what is perceived as popular at the moment. We've seen that just now, as soon as Biden took office, That whole thing about kids in cages, that was just something that when Obama's in office, because Obama started that policy, that's just nothing. We're not even concerned about that. Trump does it. It's kids in cages and kids living in squalor. And now that Biden's in office and continuing the policy, they've got their newspeak terms. I can't really think of any off the top of the head. But they're things that are designed to make it sound like that these are a good thing and they're doing favors for these kids, when it was completely different when Trump was in office. Same thing with war. Same thing with everything else, really. Further, individual Americans' political opinions are remarkably unstable over time, vacillating between glaring contradictions, relying on a confused amalgam of elite opinions. Again, we've seen that over and over again. And the problem is pretty visceral. Evolution selected for just the kinds of cognitive biases we find in partisans on both sides today. Importantly, neither team is immune. And again, don't go thinking that they don't understand this. They are experts at exploiting it. It's just too deliberate. The science is kind of catching up with them and figuring out, how they're able to do it so effectively. But they know what they're doing. They know it's not an accident. Don't go thinking that. So, a recent paper published by the American Psychological Association suggests that from a cognitive and psychoneurological standpoint, partisans of the left and right are much more like each other than they are like nonpartisans, as most of us sensible people have known for years. Regardless of the direction and content of their political beliefs, extreme partisans had a similar cognitive profile. Their brains are malfunctioning in exactly the same way, or at least close. Specifically, partisans of all stripes show lower levels of cognitive flexibility. Importantly, even when processing information that has no political character, they are more dogmatic, less adaptable, and less able to complete tasks that require an ability to adapt to novel or changing environments and a capacity to switch between modes of thinking. So again, it's even affecting their real life outside of just their political opinions. It's not like they're normal people normally and then they get into politics and they go crazy. The craziness bleeds over into real life. Partisanship quite literally makes one dumb. Or is it that dumb people are just more likely to be committed partisans because they haven't established a causal link? Is that we would need longitudinal studies in order to better understand the causal direction and causal phenomena at play. But I think as many intelligent and skeptical people as we've seen join a team and then go crazy, and then just go crazy in their normal lives too, that would suggest it's the first way. It's partisanship making them dumb. As soon as partisanship is introduced, as soon as a question mentions a politician or political party, subjects are unable to accurately assess basic facts. Indeed, remarkably, tinging a question with a political shade renders many subjects unable to answer a simple question even when they are given the answer. You give them the answer, and they can't answer the question when you bring in their political cheering group. Studies have shown that one's political affiliations even affect her ability to perform basic math. Given an operation that yields a statistic contradicting a subject's partisan view, the subject will tend to question the result rather than updating based on the evidence or attempting to reconcile the new information with her politics. Yep, I can't be wrong. It must be something wrong with math. And again, there are links to these things. Not really showing up with this color configuration here. But yep, there's links all over the place. This isn't speculation. This is actual science. So, University of Exeter, Darren Schreiber, attempted to address the lack of brain imaging research specifically aimed at better understanding nonpartisans, a group that has been neglected as almost all research has focused on the differences between the brains of partisans of the left and the right. The study found that nonpartisans' brains are different from those of their brainwashed brethren, particularly in regions that are typically involved in social cognition. It may be that the next stage in human evolution will involve rewiring our brains to accept the fact that current groups are artificially and arbitrarily defined, that all human beings are one people. Which was the goal of the Enlightenment. And as far as I can tell, libertarians are the only ones who still believe in it. But it's true. It's true. Our social concern should extend to all human beings, and even all sapient beings if it's ever shown that, an animal, chimpanzee or something has achieved sapience, or if someday we actually do meet alien life forms and they exhibit sapience, we should, extend our social concern to include those as well. because that's really the important thing. That's what makes us alike. So, just as there is harmful, toxic tribalism, there is also socially beneficial, cooperative cosmopolitanism. As social policy expert Elizabeth A. Segal writes, ultimately, our goal should be to build the tribe we all belong to, that of humanity. Libertarians take this lesson quite seriously, for we tend to see ourselves as part of a common global community of connected individuals who are perfectly capable of dealing with one another through peaceful and mutually beneficial interactions. This is the infuriating thing about trying to have a discussion with socialists and communists, because they think individualism means, and they are completely immune to correction, individualism means you just deal with your own selfish needs, you build a cabin in the woods, or you lie and cheat and steal and take it from everyone else, and of course they're the ones that are so great about being social. It's exactly the opposite. You cannot have that with a collectivist mentality. You need, and sounds like a paradox, but it's true, you need an individualist mentality in order to have this, true cosmopolitan idea of all of humanity, and to understand that, we're all capable of doing great things as long as we're left to interact with each other in a voluntary fashion. You can really only get there through individualism, because that's the only way you can realize that no individual is better to or superior to any other. I mean, we're better at some people are better musicians, but no one has any privileged position of power over anyone else. That's the only way you can get there. Because otherwise, with collectivism, you're just going to divide down in your little tribes. You want evidence? Just look at socialists. Basically, when socialists take over a country, who are the first ones they ship off to the gulags? Who are the first ones they go to war with? Who are the first ones they repress? It's not libertarians. It's not free thinkers. It's not, the social democrats or whatever. It's other socialists. They're the ones they go after first. We celebrate social, cultural, religious, and linguistic differences as the spice of life, rather than seeing them as dividing lines or impediments to willing collaboration. If we can understand and think clearly through partisanship, we can begin to build a freer world based not on arbitrary divisions and compromised reasoning, but on mutual respect and renewed emphasis on rigorous critical thinking. I can think of no greater concept that needs to be understood right now than that. The idea that you should deplatform or block or cut off people, just because they disagree with you politically, or because they're a different social group, or they're a different religion, or from a different culture or whatever, that is absolutely ridiculous. And notice that these very same leftists will pay lip service to this idea, so they know it's a good idea. They just don't want to follow it. They make this big deal of, we're so inclusive of people of color. Yeah, until a person of color says something that goes against the opinions that you think people of color should have. And then there are a bunch of Uncle Toms and you need to deplatform them. Yeah. Don't believe me, just ask Eric July. He's made a bunch of videos on that. Yeah. Or any black person who's a free thinker, So, yep, if you don't go along with the crowd and bray with the sheep, then you're not a part of the group. You're a domestic terrorist and all these mean, nasty, ugly things. It's terrible. It's terrible, and it needs to stop. And the way it stops is by making people more aware of what's going on inside their own brains. So please share this everywhere and hit like, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. Comments for the comment god, shares for the share throne. Bless the algorithm that it might grant this video higher rankings and related videos and things like that, because that's the only way it's going to happen, because YouTube's not going to do it on their own. You need to share this video around. You need to do the things that will make it more attractive to the algorithm. You need to, engage in discussions on other platforms such as Library and Odyssey. All of these things, you need to get this information out there, because it's not just that we're being manipulated by people in power or by the news media or whatever. Ultimately, we're being manipulated by our own brains. And that is something that we should have control over, but it takes awareness. So please work on that. Please show this to everyone you know. Make sure they're all aware of this. And above all, the big way to fix all of this and prevent all of this from happening is what I say at the end of every video. Just stay strong and be free.